This is the Corporations Committee, and we've got a couple of bills up today. For me, there's a little bit of nostalgia in this bill. The first bill for our consideration, Senate File 51, Wyoming Telecommunications Act revisions. And I'd like for the industry presenters to come forward if they would and join us at the table. This is the first bill I ever worked on in corporations, and I wasn't even a member of the committee, but I'd recently been elected to the legislature, and I came from the Illinois Commerce Commission. And I ended up volunteering, and Dave Groover and Les Bowron, was in the House Chairman of Corporations, and he was named for Lester Hunt, by the way, because his mom and dad both worked for Lester Hunt in Washington, and they met there and got married. Les Bowron, Dave Groover, and I wrote the Wyoming Telecommunications Act in 1995. And then Charlie Scott tried to wreck it, and then, but no, he made a lot of helpful assistance, and the rest is kind of history. It's had a few sunsets that have been extended over time. Now it's got a little bit more structured approach, I think. It didn't go away like I think I originally hoped it would, but here we are, and we have industry representatives. Jason, why don't you introduce yourself and your representatives and take us through this bill?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Jason Hendricks with Range. We're a communications provider in a number of parts of the state, competitive and non-competitive, and we're a member of the Wyoming Telecommunications Association.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. Jody Levin here on behalf of Charter and Verizon.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Dave Pickard. I'm here on behalf of Lumen, formerly known as CenturyLink, and in some areas of the state of Wyoming continue to be known as CenturyLink. Thank you.
There you go. Is there any prefatory remarks you might wish to offer? I mean, the state of telecom in Wyoming is very vastly different than it was when this was first offered, and I don't know if you want to touch on that or.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if it's okay, I'd give a little bit of a background on the industry and the reason why we're here before we get into the actual language in the bill, if that's okay.
Absolutely, go ahead.
Okay. So yes, as Mr. Chairman talked about, 1995, this act passed for the first time. Prior to that, telecommunications was just like any other regulated monopoly utility, so like electric and gas. And so what this act did is it opened up the market for competition. So in a normal regulated monopoly scenario, you have urban areas and the customers in urban areas supporting rural areas. So the rates might be a little bit high relative to a competitive market in urban areas and a little bit low to keep them affordable in rural areas. So this did away with that, allowed for competition, and with new technology, new entrants were able to come in and primarily compete in the more urban areas. But because of that anticipation of what would happen under competition, the Universal Service Fund was established in order to keep rates affordable and service available in rural areas. So instead of having an implicit subsidy mechanism within the rate structure, there was an explicit mechanism. So there's a small fee on the local phone bill to help keep rates affordable in the rural areas. So not part of the general fund, it's a user fee that's paid for within the industry. The act has been modified a number of times since 1995, but it has a sunset provision in it. It had right from the beginning, I believe, right from the beginning. And this allowed for periodic review of the act to keep it up, modernized with current technology. And so there have been changes over time to account for the changes in the industry. And so here we are again. The act is set to sunset in July 1st, 2025, absent an extension. The entire regulatory structure of telecommunications in the state would go away. And there are a lot of negative repercussions for that. So industry and other stakeholders worked all interim to come up with a bill. It was very productive discussion, lots of give and take. As with any compromise, no one is 100% happy with everything and prefers maybe some different solutions, but at the end of the day, it's a compromise that we can all live with. And so the members of the stakeholder group that were working on that was the Public Service Commission, Office of Consumer Advocate, the Wyoming Telecom Association, some competitive providers, wireless providers, AARP, and Farm Bureau. So just as a summary of the changes and what was changed and what wasn't changed before we get into the actual language, this extends the sunset date of the act by 6 years to July 1st, 2031. It's a modernization of the act in various aspects. It removes obsolete provisions, clarification on what's competitive and supported by the Universal Service Fund, which is just local voice service in areas not deemed to be competitive. Clarification on what's not regulated and therefore not eligible for Wyoming Universal Service Fund. Basically every other communication service, wireless, broadband, and anything long distance, all that stuff was mostly deregulated anyways, but this provides further clarification on some of the ancillary services. There's a new language clarifying that there can be assessments on prepaid wireless. There are some conflicting provisions there are conflicting provisions in the current act. This seeks to clarify those. And then there's an addition of broadband to the services that government entities cannot provide except only in certain limited situations where the incumbent provider or some other provider doesn't wish to provide service, then a government entity can provide service in that situation. So that's broadband was added to that list. So things that we didn't change. Express delegation of the Commission for powers under the Federal Communications Act. And one thing I didn't mention in the overview is, so Wyoming was first in 1995 with opening up the market to competition and its Telecom Act. But the Federal Communications Commission came out the next year and had their own act opening up the industry for competition, very similar in a lot of ways to Wyoming and what was done. So Wyoming was definitely a leader in that regard. And so this retains some of the things that are required of the commission from the Federal Communications Act. It still retains its pro-competition policies, its pro-industry policies, which limits government competition. It has various consumer protection provisions, including quality of service requirements, notice requirements to customers, prohibitions on changing services without the customer's consent, and the Commission's review of customer complaints. It still retains its prohibition on discriminatory and anti-competitive behavior. It still has its cap on retail phone rates and wholesale switched access rates. Switched access is when a long-distance company sends its calls to local providers or receives them from local providers. There's a fee for that, so it keeps the cap on that. It still retains its arbitration of company-to-company disputes, and then it retains Wyoming Universal Service Fund, which keeps rates affordable and available in high-cost rural areas. And then there's the state review and direction on Federal Universal Service Fund support. Under the Federal Universal Service Fund, there's an interaction with the state fund, and then there's also the annual certification in order to be eligible to receive federal funds. This retains that. So that's a summary of what was changed and what wasn't changed, and the reason for what we came up with. And then I'll just kind of go through the bill and kind of point out.
Let's take a check and see if there's any preliminary questions before we go forward. You're good, keep going.
Okay. So I'll go through and highlight each of the things that I mentioned. So nothing on page 1. Page 2 of the bill is where the sunset date is extended to July 1st, 2031. Page 3 of the bill, we did a little bit of rearranging of the language, and what we have here is the definition of local exchange service very clearly is residential service, which are capable of providing, and it lists what those are. These from page 3 to 4 comes out of the current statute, but it's a rearranging of where they are to be very clear on what local service is, which is important when we talk about what is actually supported. Page 4, the insertion of essential and non-competitive is just to keep those terms consistent throughout the act. And that's, a lot of these changes are of that sort, where because there were changes to the act at different periods in time, some of the terms were not quite consistent in how they were used. So we cleaned all that up. In the implementation of what the commission does, it's very clear, but in the act, it was a little bit off. And so we just wanted to make sure that that's all clear with current practice and what the intent of the act was. The insertion of locations there on line 15, that's a further clarification on what we'll talk about in a few lines. What we're getting at here is that there can be a competitive classification at the sub-company level. So it's not just a company is competitive or not competitive. This and then some other changes clearly allow for some locations to be competitive and others to still be non-competitive and receive universal service. So just consistency in terms there. Line 20, again, we're just trying to use consistent terms. No change in intent. Page 5 on broadband internet access and the reason for the definition there. I'll turn it over to Ms. Levin to talk about that.
Ms. Levin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, Jody Levin for Charter and Verizon. The need for the definition on broadband internet access service comes later in the act, where there is a limitation on political subdivisions from being able to offer service. Why this becomes important is with all of the federal funds that are now coming for broadband, one of the services that gets offered with the underlying infrastructure is voice service. And this act remains focused on voice service only. We added and it's called BIAS, Broadband Internet Access Service. We added the definition of BIAS so that later in section 413, it's clear that a political subdivision can't offer service without first giving industry the opportunity to provide that service. If industry comes in and says, we're not interested, then the political subdivision can move forward. That ties back to, I think it was 2007, where we actually had some political subdivisions starting to offer service or exclusive contracts in competition with the rest of industry. So because voice service can be offered through the same infrastructure, we felt it was important to clarify that industry would at least have the opportunity to compete first.
Thank you, Ms. Levin. It's not used in any other regulatory sense in the act?
Mr. Chairman, it is not.
How about in the case where a provider of this service is a competitor, though, to a provider of voice service, and perhaps there's an interruption in facilities like a cable cut or maybe it's even deliberate? Is there any authority that the commission might have in that sense?
Mr. Chairman, there is a preemption on the regulation of broadband federally. And states can regulate broadband, but they have to do it in a manner that's consistent with the FCC. Our state has not done that. Our state takes a very pro-industry stance on that and has left broadband unregulated. So in this case, again, it's really addressing the ability for a political subdivision to compete with industry.
Thank you. Keep going, Mr. Hendricks.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, on that same page, again, page 5, I want to draw your attention to also page 31, on section 2 on the repealers. What I talked about, actually it's back a couple pages, I'm sorry, on the local exchange definition, when I said that we moved some language around.
Right.
Those repealers in section 2 cover that part under 103A, 4A through D, those are the repealers.
What page are the repealers on?
Page 31.
Okay, very end. Okay.
And then also on that repealer, which I'm going to talk about since we're still on that, on this, there's some things that were taken out. And so back to page 5 under 104. What we did with this section is the way that this was structured before is it defined telecommunications broadly. And then there were various things that were listed saying, this isn't telecommunications, this isn't telecommunications, this isn't telecommunications. So we reversed it. We said, this is actually what is regulated, and it's non-competitive essential telecommunication service. And so it's very clear on what is not. And then the rest of the language there, going on to page 6, we retained some of that language because we wanted to make it clear that things that may kind of seem like telecommunications, we wanted to make clear that, yeah, they really are not regulated. And so going on to page 6, that's wireless service, and then going on to page 7, private telecommunication service. So again, this is a reversal just to make it very clear. This is what the act is for. These are the things that are not covered, except in limited cases for fees that have to be paid and various other provisions that are laid out on the bottom of page 5, line 23. So I kind of skipped around there for a little bit, but I wanted to provide a background on where that goes, and kind of a little bit all over the place in this section. That's the reason for the changes in section 104.
Okay.
Going on to page 8, you have a deletion of essential for again, consistency in terms on line 9 there. And then on 202, lines 18 and 19, this gets at what I was talking about earlier, where certain locations can be deemed competitive. Under the current act, that's probably something that could be done. This makes it very clear, and then it ties it in later that it's a competitor could come in, for example, and say, well, in this town, we serve this. It's very clear that they are a competitor, but we're not going to claim competition in your other areas, in your rural areas. And so this allows for a company to be declared, or a location to be declared competitive, and then that company on lines 21 and then through to the next page could still receive universal service funding for those areas that were deemed not competitive. So it just makes it very clear on what can happen, that a company can't get universal service for what's deemed competitive. The other areas they can, and then this would allow for some adjustments in rates to make up for the difference for the rural areas. That's the intent of 8 to 9 in that section.
Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Jason, I hope I'm following this okay. Let's see if I am. So we go out to one of our smaller communities in the state, for example. In a town proper, there might be the opportunity for a competitive service, but you get out in the rural part of that area, then a company may be able to benefit from the universal fund. Is that really what we're talking about there?
Jason. Mr. Hendricks.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon, yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Section D there, lines 10 through 13, again, just clarifying the language, keeping consistent terms. That also applies for the rest of that page as well. Same as on page 10, consistency in terms. Page 11, this allows for an easier, streamlined way to post prices to the commission. Right now, you have, if you've ever seen an electric tariff, very, very detailed, lots of legalese language. It's been there probably for 50, 60 years in some cases, maybe some updating on pricing. We have some of that too. And so this would allow for a posting of the pricing on the website in an electronic format, so no more paper copies. The commission is kind of going that route anyways. This puts it in the statute. And then it still makes it clear that we'd have to provide notice. That's the language on lines 12 through 15. that we would still provide notice to customers and in a manner that they would typically receive information so that they know if we're going to be changing prices, they could still come into the commission and complain or voice their concerns. This just changes the format to make it more streamlined and more consistent with how people actually look up service prices these days than going to the commission and looking at the tariff.
So if anybody's ever been to, remember the parts stores when you were younger and the big books on the parts store? Illinois Bell's tariff filled up books like that that were probably 25 feet long with all the terms and conditions for all the different services, everything you could imagine. It's hard to believe, but
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I used to have those binders like that on my.
he worked at the Illinois Commission too. We both came from there. Yes.
That'll look like Senator Scott's desk.
But even bigger, if you can imagine, even bigger. Yeah. Keep going, Mr. Hendricks.
Going on to page 12, that just continues the same concept on the simplified format and what it would look like. Section 404, consistency of terms. Going on to page 13, because of some other changes that were made as far as what's regulated, what's not regulated, just wanted to make clear in lines 4 to 5 and lines 13 to 14, the things that the commission still has authority over, which they do today, just making it very clear because of the other changes we made that we're not changing these things. Consistency in term on line 20, and then going on to the next page, page 14, line 9, same thing. 406 is on quality of service, just making it clear. Again, this is backing up a page. Backing up a page on page 13, lines 20 to 21. You'll see that it says non-competitive essential telecommunication service. There's a consistency in that on lines 17 to 18 on page 14. So that's similar to the previous section, but it's just making clear that the complaints are really just about those services. Changing a shall to a may, that was an amendment that was made in the last interim committee meeting. So that was a committee amendment. So let's see.
Mr. Chairman. Senator Boner.
Just a little bit more discussion there. Do you recall the reason for that? It seems like a pretty significant change.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Boner. Yeah, the history of it was Senator Scott was in the process of making 3 amendment proposals. And this was the first one that passed. The second one didn't, and then he didn't bring up the third one. But the concept would have been that the commission may take complaints about things that are not non-competitive essential service, which is what the practice is today. So if you were to call the commission and say, I have a problem with my broadband service, well, technically that's not regulated, but the commission will then reach out to the company, ask for their point of view, get back to the customer, and they kind of moderate, kind of mediate a dispute. And so this is current practice on the May, and then it was in the intent to do the other stuff, which ultimately never happened.
So we probably ought to fix that somehow?
I think I would ask the commission to comment on that. We're okay with the language. I think it's okay the way it is.
Okay. I'm starring it.
Okay, going to section 413. This is what Ms. Levin was talking about.
Mr. Chairman,
This is your favorite part of the bill, isn't it? I can tell.
Mr. Chairman, I actually have other favorite parts of the bill, but I'll get to those in a second. The changes that you see in 3715, 413, so this is pages 15 through 19, half of page 19. This is the inclusion of broadband internet access service in the limitation on political subdivisions being able to offer service in competition with industry. So as I mentioned previously, that underlying infrastructure can offer voice service, We're trying to keep this to be a very voice-centric act, but the fact that you can offer that service, we felt like we needed to clarify that political subdivisions need to at least give notice and an opportunity for industry to provide the service before they move forward and do it on their own.
Is this where we put in an amendment about wind turbines and stuff that municipalities want to do?
Mr. Chairman, to my knowledge, wind turbines can't provide telecom service, so I think we're okay here. And again,
Well,
this
that's
is,
another bill, I'm sorry.
this is, again, it's a limitation. It's not a prohibition on political subdivisions. It's a limitation. We stressed that multiple times throughout the interim, that we just, as industry, it is a competitive industry. It's very difficult to compete against government, as you know, and so we're just asking for the opportunity to provide service first. If industry says they can't meet the needs of the political subdivision, then the political subdivision can move forward.
Got it. Back for you.
Mr. Chairman, so on page 19 through, 29, these are, this is the stuff on prepaid wireless, which again, I turn over to Ms. Levin to talk about.
Mr. Chairman, when we began in the working group discussions, one of the issues that was flagged by the Public Service Commission was conflicting language in statute where their intent was for all carriers, regardless of technology, to pay into the Universal Service Fund. I think that's industry's expectation as well. We understood that. With the case of prepaid wireless, there was some language where some prepaid companies believed that they did not have that obligation. So the Public Service Commission asked for the working group to address that situation. The language that you see on page 23 in J is a new imposition on prepaid wireless, a requirement that they also have to contribute to the Universal Service Fund. This is a lot of language, we recognize that. So this begins on page 23, line 12, and it goes all the way through page 29. The reason why this becomes a very lengthy addition to the act is that the way carriers collect assessments, fees, taxes, and surcharges is through a bill. Carriers in the situation of prepaid wireless, they don't have a bill. They're not billing a customer. That transaction is happening at a retail level. So several years ago, we addressed the obligation of prepaid to contribute to 911 fees. Again, it's an imposition statute that works through the local retailers and the Department of Revenue. We essentially took that exact same language, that imposition notion from prepaid 911, and we replicated it here for prepaid wireless. So we worked with Department of Revenue. The wireless carriers have a trade association. We worked through them to see how this happens in other states. And it's a transaction that the retailers will then collect and remit. It will go on a form, and then the Department of Revenue will distribute the funds. So this is why it takes several pages to get through all of this, because you have to essentially allow for the imposition to be collected at the retail level.
Thank you for that. And I see the Department of Revenue's here.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Hendricks?
the fiscal note is specific to this.
Okay.
That's what the fiscal note is for. So then we're on to page 30, and then this is just consistency in terms again. And then 31, I talked about the repealers in section 2. The first section under 1 to 3 was just moving language around, and the other one was because of the change of what was regulated to being clear on, the telecommunications versus what's not regulated. So that was the changes there under 104. I think, let's see. I think that pretty much covers it. I'm staying for any questions.
Okay, any questions by the committee? Any questions? So, Mr. Hendricks, in this statute, we don't actually have the Universal Service Fund. It's not,
Mr. Chairman, it's in here to the extent that it was just talked about by Ms. Levin
Right.
for the prepaid, but otherwise it is not in here as far as how it's determined, the rates and who pays and all that. That's not part of it because we kept that the same, except that with the new language, it does allow for a subset of competitive classification.
All right, thank you. Does the Universal Service Fund still fund multiple lines at a customer premise?
Mr. Chairman, theoretically, yes. Practically, not really, because a lot of people don't have lines, second lines, like you did back in the late 90s when you had multiple lines to access internet and so forth. People are mostly down to one line in a lot of cases just for emergency, or in the cases where there's no wireless service or any other competitive service, it is their landline to the world. But there aren't very many second lines these days, for what that's worth.
Thank you. Anybody else? And then in terms of anti-competitive behavior, there's this crazy situation in my district where a broadband company has cut the lines of a landline company in several locations. And it has hurt some constituents of mine. What tools are in this act to address that situation? And the broadband company seems to be somewhat recalcitrant to admit their fault in this, and apparently they didn't even get it located. But it's a really bad situation. If you can imagine, the single lines were people that didn't have very good cell service, and so this is Charlie Scott's dream situation. And we seem to not be able to get people to pay attention to repairing these lines and getting these people back into service. What's going to help us in this act with that?
Mr. Chairman, and I'll turn it over to my colleague here to add some thoughts too. I just became aware of that situation as well. My thought would be that that's probably more of a call before you dig 811 issue, because that does deal with making sure that you have stuff located before you dig, taking care before you dig so that you don't damage facilities. And if you do damage facilities and you were careless, there are penalties associated with that. There's penalties for not calling before you dig. I think that that's probably the best approach. Within this Telecommunications Act itself, not within this bill, I don't think the language is in this bill. I can't think of any repercussions for deliberately cutting something. I guess maybe it does fall under more of the non-competitive. If it's determined they're deliberately trying to be non-competitive, maybe it fits in, but I don't know, and I will turn it over to my colleague to add additional thoughts.
Thank you very much. Mr. Pickard, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the question. It is certainly timely. Again, Mr. Chairman, Dave Pickard representing Lumen. The incident that you speak of occurred very recently. We are in communication with the Public Service Commission to determine what recourses there are. I would agree with Mr. Hendricks that one, we have a violation or a purported violation of the 811 statutes, call before you dig. So hopefully there is some recourse through there. But I think the sensitive nature of this particular incident it's kind of outside of, got to be careful here, but it's outside of what I would consider a normal business operating climate. And there are challenges due to that bring in externalities that we have not faced in the past. Typically all of the telecom industry, the construction industry, the pipeline industry, anything that, and any type of activity that's taking place in right-of-ways and there is a cut or a damage to other people's facilities and properties, there is recourse. And that's where we would stand, is that there should be recourse. Those damages should be repaired. We do have some challenges in this particular incident.
Mr. Pickard is being very cryptic and.
Very much am.
And I appreciate it. The location of this incident was on the Wind River Indian Reservation within my district. In fact, I'm, one of the facilities is my church on the reservation in Hattie. And the company asked for an easement across our property and then severed the cable for everybody. So they haven't accomplished their easement yet, so we're trying to maybe make that a focal point for fixing the facilities, but that's why the problem here perhaps.
Mr. Chairman, and I don't want to deflect our work here on the Telecom Act to the next bill before you, but it does go hand in hand with the discussion of 911 and what is access to 911. There are various levels of not being able to call 911, and certainly we have customers in the district that's affected that are unable to use our product, our lines, to access 911 because their lines have been cut. Now, if they have access through other means, whether it be a wireless provider or some other communication mechanism, texting off of their computer, et cetera, we are not aware of that, but certainly when we do start talking about 911 and what is an outage and what isn't an outage, this type of activity comes into play. And Mr. Chairman, with that, I would stand for any other questions on it, but I am very limited in what I can speak about.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you all. Stand by. I think what the plan would be to go to the agencies.
Chairman?
Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Levine.
Can I just make one last point
Just
about the act?
one.
Just one, Mr. Chairman, because it's something you don't see in the bill, but it's
Okay.
retained in the overall act, and that's 3715-401. That is commission powers. And in this case, this is where we talk about the investigative powers of the commission to require telecom companies to adhere to the laws of the state. So we didn't change that section at all. That's why it doesn't show up in this act. It also contains an express delegation of authority. So for those of us in the telecom world, think of it as primacy. It is primacy for the state to be able to address federal law here versus companies and customers having to go to DC and address issues before the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. That's really important to the state of Wyoming, to retain those provisions and those powers for our Public Service Commission. I mean, without that, it's a little bit of an unknown for the companies. Every time we have a change in the federal administration, you kind of feel a little bit like a ping pong where they propose different rules and industry challenges those rules, and you're kind of in this limbo. Having the Public Service Commission be able to arbitrate disputes, address complaints, that provides an entire level of regulatory certainty that's good for customers and it's good for companies. But in the case that was just discussed, there may be some opportunities for investigations because that section is being retained in its entirety.
Thank you, Ms. Levin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anything else, committee? Stand by. Let's go to the Public Service Commission, and then we'll pick up the Department of Revenue. Welcome. It's good to see you. You can pull up more chairs if you need them. I thought I saw Commissioner Throne at one point, but it's okay. Mr. Petrie, welcome. Introduce your team.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Chris Petrie. I'm the Deputy Chairman at the Public Service Commission. I have with me Melissa Mizell. She is our Wyoming Universal Service Fund Administrator, and Mr. John Burbridge, our Chief Counsel.
Thank you very much for coming. Welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, you've had a very comprehensive tour of what this bill does. I heard nothing that I disagree with. There are some from industry, I mean. The explanation was very complete, I believe. The commission was included in the discussions over the interim. I think we understand what the commission will be responsible for if this bill passes. And as Mr. Hendricks and company explained, it is a great deal of clarification and modernization and consistency. The bill, I think, suffered over the years from numerous revisions and amendments, and it had become a bit hard to follow in its current form. It is a bit hard to follow. This appears to be a significant improvement in that regard. As mentioned, most of the commission's current functions remain as they are now if this bill passes. I'll just go ahead and address the questions that came up about the recent outage that's experienced in your district. And that is primarily, the primary enforcement mechanism there is the locate system, the call before you dig system, which provides penalties for violations that escalate. That's a maximum of a $5,000 penalty for violations resulting in damage, and that escalates up to, I think, $75,000 after the third, or for the third violation. And I have not been party to every conversation about that. Mr. Burbridge has, I know, discussed it with the company or with Lumen and others, but we have had in the past 4 years, I believe, excellent cooperation and support from the Wyoming Attorney General's office in enforcing the one-call statutes. So we have, as you know, a team of inspectors who are often involved in looking into call before you dig incidents, and they gather information. Mr. Burbridge and our engineers, inspectors, meet regularly with representatives of the Attorney General's office to evaluate violations for potential enforcement, and then they have imposed penalties during the last few years for those kind of violations where somebody fails to call or fails to perform prudently after they have located and they damage facilities. So that's probably the main enforcement option for incidents like you described.
And Mr. Petrie, would you mind, where does one call reside? I know it's got its own board of directors. They're made up of everybody from municipalities to utilities to excavators, but who's the host agency for that?
Mr. Chairman, that is a separate, I always think of it as a pseudo-governmental entity. And as you say, it has its board of directors. There are excavator members and owners and operators of underground facilities that are members and
So that when you say the commission and its engineers gets involved in that situation, it's not that one call resides in the Public Service Commission. You just coordinate with them a little bit? Is that what I'm understanding?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. When there is damage to an underground facility, for example, if an excavator digs up a gas line anywhere in the state, very, very often our engineers go out and inspect and investigate to a degree to see what went wrong. We want to make sure that it's not the regulated utilities that have contributed by the way that they operate, the way that they maintain their maps, the way that they respond to locate requests that have contributed to a failure of that system that's designed to prevent damage and interruptions of service because of excavations.
And Mr. Petrie, have you sent engineers out to this situation to evaluate this situation on the Wind River Indian Reservation?
Mr. Chairman, we have not done that.
Is that your intention to do so, or is it jurisdictional sticky wicky, or what?
Mr. Chairman, my understanding is that Mr. Burbridge will be speaking with the Attorney General's office to make sure that there isn't anything especially difficult about our folks being out there
Okay.
to look into it.
I'm not laughing at you, I'm just thinking about,
It's a,
it's a tough situation.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm honestly not laughing at you. Thank you, Mr. Petrie. Let's move on to the bill.
Mr. Chairman, as I said, the commission has been involved and understands what's in play here and what's intended by this bill. It seems to be a very good product from the process that we had over the interim. As I said, the commission continues with most of its customary or traditional activities, making determinations on federal universal service designations and annual certifications, considering and issuing certificates of public convenience and necessity for new entrants who will provide non-essential or non-competitive. No, I'm sorry, I'm mixing up my terms, which is part of the point here to clarify all this, but providers of essential telecommunication service, whether competitive, which they all would be as new entrants into this business, we consider applications for certificates, examine the applicant's technical, managerial, and financial wherewithal to provide service in Wyoming. Basically, we're screening those applicants who are coming to Wyoming to provide service to make sure that they are a real telephone company or a potentially real telephone company. They don't have to be established, of course, before they approach the commission. And also considering and trying to mitigate complaints in cases where it's competitive service or non-regulated service, and also potentially handling complaints that would be contested case matters for non-competitive essential service providers. And that brings up the question of the may shall that was just discussed.
Page 14.
That is page 14, line 18. And I certainly see reason to reconsider that change from shall to may, although I would say that because the Administrative Procedure Act requires the commission to conduct a contested case, if we are potentially going to affect anybody's rights or obligations, that in any case, that's what would happen. The may is, I suppose, potentially confusing, suggesting that there's some way that the commission could entertain a complaint and make some kind of a decision, require some kind of a solution, require some action by a telecommunications carrier without a hearing. I don't believe that would ever occur, that the commission would ever attempt to do it that way, but we have to, so might as well be shall.
Thanks. That's my thinking too. Anything else, Mr. Petrie?
Mr. Chairman, that's all I've got, unless you have questions.
Committee, anything from you guys? Thank you. Who should we hear from next? Mr. Burbridge? Or I do have a question about the USF, if that's okay too. So, Ms. Mizell, thank you very much. I appreciate you being here. You're the administrator of the Wyoming Universal Service Fund, is that correct?
Chairman Case, that is correct.
All right, don't worry about us. We're so easy going around here.
Yeah. Just got a little frog this morning.
Okay. But are we subsidizing multiple lines at some locations?
Like Mr. Hendricks said, it could be possible, but highly unlikely at this day and age.
Is there any way to figure that out?
Chairman Case, I'm sure that there's a way that we could figure that out just by asking the telecom companies themselves that are receiving disbursements from the Wyoming Universal Service Fund and just asking them.
I'd appreciate if we could do that. You know,
Can do
I
that.
suspect you're probably right. Initially, when the act was first contemplated, we had folks that used multiple lines in their households for intercom calling, these very large households in the old days. You know, people don't really do that anymore, but to think that Wyoming ratepayers are paying for multiple lines so that rich people can call from the upstairs bathroom down to the kitchen and find out if dinner is ready, really kind of gets to my craw. So if we could maybe ask that question, that would be good. Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the fiscal note on this bill, Ms. Mizell, is pretty significant. I guess I was a little bit surprised that many prepaid devices were being purchased out there. How much is in this fund, and how much does this universal fund receive every year in taxpayer dollars?
Ms. Mizell, and it's dollars raised from telecom customers, but yeah,
Yes.
taxpayer dollars, I guess. Ms. Mizell, thank you, if you can.
Yeah, Chairman Case, Senator Landon. I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but I can tell you this fiscal year alone, July 2024 through December 2024, we've received about $921,000 so far this year. And we have dispersed in assessments, about 1.4, no, that's going to be the wrong number, excuse me. About $162,000 a month is what we disperse in support payments.
So, Mr. Chairman, just, and I don't want to spend too long on this, but I just didn't remember from appropriations days, what that fund, how much was in there and what we're dispersing, but I thought I heard you say about $160,000 a month
Correct.
goes out in disbursements to essentially refund companies who are providing this service in rural areas, right?
Chairman Case, Senator
Go ahead.
Landon, that is correct. And to keep the rates for consumers under $30 per month for essential service.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
And if I
Ms.
may.
Mizell?
Yes, I do have the numbers for the prior fiscal year, in the fact that we paid out over $2 million in support payments, and we received about $2 million in support payments.
It's
Or
kind of,
assessments, I'm sorry.
it's kind of set to be.
Yeah.
If you set the collections based on the amount necessary to keep rural rates below $30, isn't that fair?
Chairman Case, that is correct. And if we do have extra money, then that just helps reduce the assessment rate for the following fiscal year.
Which means that if we bring in this prepaid source of funding, it actually lowers everybody else's assessment potentially down the road.
Chairman Case, that is correct.
Senator Landon,
Mr.
what
Chairman,
do you think
thank
about $30?
So, that actually piqued some interest on my part, this $30 benchmark. Is that set through rules and regs? Is that just a goal? I'm just curious, and obviously everything else that we've dealt with in the legislature the last 5 years has just been inundated with increases and all sorts of things. So Is it still realistic? Is it established by rule? Where'd that come from?
Ms. Mizell,
Chairman Case, Senator Landon, that is in our statutes, is 3715-501H, where our benchmark is set at $30. And that's also in there that we are within 10% of that. So as long as we're within the $27 to $33, that's where we need to be. And last year, we were pretty close to that top mark. I think we were like $32 and some change in there, so we're getting close. But the commission also has the opportunity to review that every year, and if they so choose to change that benchmark, we can. They have that opportunity.
so Ms. Mizell, how would that benchmark get changed? Who would, I bet everybody loves $30, and the people that are paying it probably, they're kind of looking the other day. But why couldn't we take it to $40? Mr. Petrie?
Mr. Chairman, the benchmark is set in the statute at $30. There's a mechanism by which the commission can consider that, and if reality tells us that that is no longer a suitable proxy number for the actual average cost of essential telecommunications service in the state, then the commission can revise that number, which would change all the calculations. So as it is right now, it's requiring right around $2 million of disbursements, payments to telecommunications companies. That's the $163,000 a month times 12 months. And that requires currently a 1.9% assessment rate on telecommunications bills around the state, as Ms. Senator Case, Chairman Case pointed out, including prepaid wireless customers in contributing to that fund potentially lowers that 1.9%. But it's monitored every year when we get the Wyoming Universal Service Fund Administrator's report. Included in that is a calculation and a result that shows us how close the $30 is to what we would have done in the past. And the reason I think that the $30 was selected was because it was kind of hovering around in that area, and it complicated things to change that every annual process.
So you guys, I don't know what you think, but $30 sounds pretty cheap for a month of landline service that other people have to pay for. We might think about that. We could certainly bring in that part of the statute and raise it to 40, raise it to 50. It's, so do we have any idea if it were $50? You have any idea, Ms. Mizell, what it would do to the price or the amount of money you need to collect?
Chairman Case, it would significantly reduce that amount that we would need to collect. I'm just trying to think back through a lot of the telecom companies that are receiving disbursements through the fund. And there are several rural companies that have significantly higher rates than the $30. But we also need to take into consideration too that we've got two types of disbursements through the fund. One through what we call the defunding, because it's 3715-501D. And then we also have the pot of money through 3715-501G, which basically we're keeping the telecom companies whole. And so based on the receipts that they get and their loop costs that they're sending out, we try to keep them whole. And that pot of money is set at think it's $69,000 a year. So even if those rates would change, those 4 companies, that would still be the same. And if we had other companies decide to join that pool of money, it's allocated based on the cap of that. So that would always be the same amount going out every year.
Is that also by statute?
That is by statute, 3715-501G. So it has a cap set on it. And then the other disbursement out of the 3715-501D does not have a disbursement on it. So those companies that are receiving disbursements out of there, which would be 5 or 6 other companies, there are probably several of those telecom companies that, unless they came in for a rate case and adjusted their rates, they would probably, I would imagine, there would be half of them that would no longer receive funding out of that. But there are still a pretty good chunk of them that have pretty high rates in the area because it's based on mileage from the office, the central office. So depending on how far out their customers are from their central office, that's how they do their rates.
Would it be possible for you, I don't want you to go to a lot of work, but maybe to provide a written explanation of these 2 pieces of this? It can be very, very rough, and it'll just be for the committee, unless you would like it to be more broadly distributed, but just a paragraph or 2 would be nice. Is it possible?
Chairman Case, absolutely. So you just want a brief summary of how the disbursements go between the 2 different funding mechanisms?
Yes.
Okay, and would you also like me to include in that how many customers are above that $30 and how many?
That'd be fabulous.
Bet.
And maybe if you feel like having fun with playing with $40 and $50, you could do that too.
You got it.
I appreciate it. 50. Well, if I go for 50, you guys might settle at 40. And Charlie Scott will settle at $12.
Conflict being declared.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony. Mr. Burbidge, you got a second to talk about the Wind River Indian Reservation and situation there?
I can do my best, Chairman Case.
What do we know about that and what's the path forward?
At Chairman Case, thank you. What we know about that is that there are potential jurisdictional issues that we are looking at because the hits or the cuts, to the best of our knowledge, my knowledge, were on the reservation.
I think you can be assured of that.
And so we are a little bit unclear as to what our jurisdiction will be and I need to discuss that further with the Attorney General's office. I'm aware of some other issues within the reservation itself that is in fact making it difficult for access for the company.
Which company?
I have been dealing with Lumen and have been discussing with Lumen the situation, and they are looking into it. But I've been informed that they've had difficulty even gaining permission to come in and look to make repairs at this time. So there's a lot swirling around with this particular situation that we have not fully resolved. And I did not hear back from Lumen last week, but I haven't followed up with them either, just with the holidays, things are, but we've got some difficult issues that we're looking in front of us. I have also been in communication with the governor's office over the situation. So we have not seen yet any complaints through the 811 call before you dig.
Are they even aware of it?
The way we're aware of it, and so by extension, yes. And I've just been discussing it with our lead engineer. But that falls back on, we're examining our jurisdictional issues about being able to do something with it. I would also add that there are several we are heavily involved with the 811 enforcement process, even despite with that statute. A variety of entities can enforce 811 violations, including operators, law enforcement. what we are in the position of taking the lead on that because others have not. Prosecuting attorneys could also do that. So it's not directly under any specific state agency, the 811 enforcement, but we have been doing that with the Attorney General's office. So it's a work in progress still with the situation on the reservation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Burbidge. I just might, we have primacy over FCC practices and federal practices about anti-competitive and sharing of facilities, non-discriminatory right-of-ways and poles. I would assume that federal requirements on Indian reservations would be similar to federal requirements off the reservations. Is there a federal avenue that you could explore and see if the commission has tools in that area, either as their surrogate or as directly with the FCC?
Thank you, Chairman Case. As I sit here today, I'm not able to answer that question.
Maybe you could look into
I'll
that.
have to look into that.
Thank you. Anybody else for these guys? Senator Landon.
So, sorry to belabor, but this is fascinating, and I think it's, it's a part of the world that I think is going to continue to have its stresses. When you say you're struggling to get access, are you talking about individual property owner level, or is this access through the tribes? I guess I'm confused as to why a company couldn't go in and fix their lines.
Mr. Burbidge.
Chairman Case, Senator Landon, I'm going to have to confer with Lumen some more on that issue. My understanding was that the difficulty was working with the tribe, not the individual landowners. But I'm not certain on that, so I would have to follow up with them.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't even know where to begin on this, and it's not suitable here, but it's fair to say that the offending company that cut the lines is a tribally owned company. So that's an extra wrinkle, I think. Although I don't think at all that the tribal business councils were in any way condoning what happened. It seems to be a great lack of care. So thank you. Thank you so much. Let's hear from the Department of Revenue if there's nothing further, and then we'll cover that section and we'll take public comment. A couple of my two favorite people from a different era in my life. Come on up. You guys think I'm just telecom or just corporations, but I used to be somebody in revenue. And Mr. Fanning is the director of the Excise Tax Division, and he's actually the chief. They have stupid titles over there, but what is that title, Mr. Fanning?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett Fanning. I'm the Excise Tax Administrator at the Wyoming Department of Revenue.
Very good. Good to have you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. So my testimony on this will just be related to kind of the prepaid wireless aspect of this. Right now, the Department of Revenue does administer the prepaid wireless tax. So when you go to a retailer or a convenience store or someone who's selling prepaid calling cards, they're going to charge you an additional tax on that. It's 1.5%. Last year on that 1.5%, the Department of Revenue collected $419,000 on that 1.5 charge on prepaid calling cards. So there is a significant amount of sales, more than many would anticipate, the popularity of prepaid wireless. Right now, we have about 100 companies that submit prepaid wireless tax to us. Comes into the Department of Revenue, and then we disperse it out to our local entities that they can use in their 9/11 operations. So we do have some of the functionality in place for this additional charge on prepaid wireless. And right now, 1.5%, we've worked with the PSC on this, trying to figure out what that rate may be going forward. And it looks like it was, at the time of the discussion, 1.9. So we do have a similar tax. So it's going to be 1.5%. That's going to go to support 9/11 operations, and then 1.9% that's going to go to this Universal Service Fund. So the retailers, they do already have some familiarity with this tax and truly appreciate the various stakeholders in this room, the industry as well, because the Department of Revenue does not have any concerns with administering this bill. A lot of the items have been discussed for. You're going to see from pages 23 to 29, it's a conglomeration of our prepaid wireless statutes and then our sales tax statutes, rate change notifications, distribution, all of that in there. So, Mr. Chairman, with the fiscal note that we had, the $531,000, that was backing into using our prepaid wireless figures. So we were pretty confident, at least if this tax were in effect at the time I did the fiscal note, pretty confident in that figure and what it would raise. Now, the Department of Revenue, for this particular aspect, would require IT programming. And it's a little bit fold in here. The reason being is right now, and I know a lot of the members in the industry, we've talked about this, our prepaid wireless return is one of our only remaining hard copy returns. So you've got some of the biggest telecom companies in the world or in the United States, all the way down to mom and pop gas stations who are selling prepaid wireless. They can submit their sales tax to our office electronically via our online portal. But then we've actually got a hard copy, mail them a return for prepaid wireless. They've got to fill it out manually and then likely send us a check for that prepaid wireless. And so it's caused a lot of frustration with the industry, but it's really due to limitations on that return for only 100 companies submitting it to us. So we've got a fiscal note, and we had our third-party IT programmer work on that fiscal note for us. The programming for it, $489,400. That was at their high end. But the main part of that programming is to integrate prepaid wireless into our online tax submission portal so that then they can then fill out their sales tax, no problem, fill out their prepaid wireless tax, no problem, and then this USF tax all in the same portal all together. And then it's all in our same system and it can get distributed just like we do with our other tax types. And so that's why, Mr. Chairman, on page 23, line 12, beginning July 1, 2026, that was the delayed implementation of this additional charge, just due to the programming it would take for the Department of Revenue to get this integrated into our system. So that's part one of that IT programming. Part two of the IT programming is there is some language in the bill saying that the retailers or the folks who sell it to us or sell prepaid wireless and send in that tax to us, they can report it together, right? They've already got familiarity with this tax. This is so when it comes in together, our systems can separate that back out. So
When you say together, do you mean together with the 911, or what do you mean?
Yes, Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
correct. So the 911 and this additional USF charge can be submitted together, and then our system to be able to back it out and distribute it correctly. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I believe that's all my notes. Thank you, sir.
Committee, any questions? Mr. Fanning, the department's not asking for an appropriations.
Mr. Chairman, yes, we would like to ask for that additional IT funding. And if this is the proper place for that, I'd be more than happy to do it.
Okay, let's hear it.
Yep, so that additional appropriation, it's a one-time administrative IT programming charge. And let me get back to my note for that, Mr. Chairman. $489,400. One-time IT programming, and then the rest of that additional maintenance is covered into our current IT contract.
And just to be clear, if these taxpayers had the ability to file electronically for the Universal Service Fund, we'd have benefits because they'd be filing for the 911 fees electronically. So you kind of get a twofer.
Mr. Chairman, correct, absolutely.
Okay. Committee, any questions on that? We'll take it up when we do amendments, but stick around if you can, that'd be great.
Thank you, Mr.
We're
Chairman.
gonna now open it up for general public comment. We don't have as much time as you think we have. If there's a lot of Me Too stuff out there, I'm into Me Too, and you don't even have to come up, but we want to hear what Mr. Moline's constituent base is telling him, so that's where we're going to start this. Mr. Moline.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation, sitting in support of this bill. The industry groups were kind enough to invite Farm Bureau to be a part of this discussion. We appreciate where the bill is. Our big push is, well, two things about the notice, that if somebody wants to get a paper copy, they can get a paper copy. That's part of my policy.
And which notice are you referring to?
It's about any changes. I can't remember where it's at, but they can either be electronic or by paper. So if a consumer wants it by paper, they can get it. I will get that citation for you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Another important part is the Universal Service Fund. We made the decision many, many years ago that we will try to help out the people that are isolated to get telephone service. My members think that continues to be an important issue. And as far as I know it's getting to be fewer and fewer people because of the advent of technology that rely on landlines, but a lot of those are my members living at the head of the creek, as they say. And so it's important to keep those phone costs down for the essential services as much as possible. As far as increasing the rates, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to see that in a separate, more robust discussion than something that's just happening here at the legislature. I think it's a discussion we need to have, but I think perhaps a more robust discussion with more information rather than doing it just here at the legislature. So I would suggest pushing that to the interim. But if that's not the case, we would be engaged in that conversation here. That, Mr. Chairman, trying to be brief, sitting in support of the bill. I'd be glad to take any questions.
Let's start with Senator Dockstader.
Sir, are you referring to page 11, either print or electronic?
Yes,
Okay.
sorry,
You
Mr.
just
Chairman.
want to ensure, Mr. Chairman, you just want to ensure that you got a print copy as well.
Let's just take a quick look at that, you guys. Yeah, in print using the same. The company shall also provide notice to each impacted customer electronically or in print using the same manner the customer receives bills from the company. That's acceptable language to you, Mr. Moline?
Mr. Chairman, yes,
And that's what you were referring to before?
yes. If I may, Senator Dockstader, thank you.
Okay. He's an old print guy. He's got ink coming out of his veins. Anybody else? Senator Landon?
Excuse me.
Mr. Chairman, I was just sitting here thinking that if we put a $500,000 appropriation on this bill, I'm just wondering if your group would still be supportive of the bill. That apparently is what it's going to cost us to get up to speed and be able to collect the tax for the universal fund. It kind of changes the complexion of the bill, does it not?
Mr. Moline?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon, yes and no. I mean, it's a cost of doing business that, if I understood the conversation right, adding that appropriation to this bill to incorporate about the universal service funds from the prepaid cellular will also have some other applications. So it sounds like what I heard, sir, is that it's something that's been needed to do in this, to make it so they can file electronically on other fees. This kind of provided the impetus, let's get a 2-for-1.
There you go. Anybody else? And Mr. Moline, I'm going to make one point. So the new fees are going to go on prepaid wireless. These are poor people, by and large. They're people that only have one phone, and they use the phone to find a job, to call the daycare for their kids if they got, or if they can afford daycare, which they probably can't. These aren't rich people. We're going to raise the rates on poor wireless customers that are already paying more than $30 a month, I assure you. I would bet they're paying considerably more than that to keep subsidizing rates at $30 in very rural areas that have been subsidized for a long time. I hope you'll share that with your members and think about that dynamics that we have here.
Mr. Chairman, if I may
You bet.
respond, yes, I will.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Mickey, did you want to address us?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Chris Mickey. I'm with the Wyoming Business Alliance. We also stand in support of this bill. I want to applaud the efforts of the working group and all the folks who came together to really put this piece of legislation together in the committee in the interim. We feel that this just lowers the burden a little bit on some of these companies and offers some clarity and modernization. And so, and Senator Landon, to your point, on the side of the retailers, lowers some of the burden for them to be electronically submitting some of their taxes and then by paper some of the other ones. So we feel that will bring a little bit less of a burden on those folks as well. So I don't really have much else to say except that, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mickey. Questions? Appreciate your testimony. Okay, let's go to the room first, and it's okay to be me too. It's okay to come up as a bunch of people. Who feels the need to address us? I don't think the bill's in trouble. I think there's a couple areas we want to talk about. Mr. Hendricks, come on.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the
Mr.
opportunity to
Hendricks,
speak.
thank
And,
you.
just wanted to address the affordability rate on the $30. Keep in mind that this is for local service. So looking at the town just east of us, Burns, population 368 people. For local service, that's roughly who you can call with that local $30 per month, give or take, depending on how many people are in the exchange. So if you wanted to call beyond that, then it's long distance fees. So when you're doing an apples to apples comparison to wireless, if you can get a wireless phone for $50, $60, $70, whatever the case might be, you're able to access the entire world. You can call everyone. And you also get broadband internet with that. You get a whole lot of services and features. So by narrowing this bill down to just local for purposes of being able to call your neighbors, being able to call 911, 811, all the other services and fees, that's what that covers. Very, very small. So, ask yourself how much you'd be willing to pay to be able to call a couple hundred people, 1,000 people, maybe a slightly bigger town. It's not that much. And Wyoming has, the last time I looked, Wyoming was the highest rates in the country when we looked back in 2015 by a wide margin. And I think that's probably still the case, although I haven't looked recently. So that's what that pays for. And plus there are fees on top of that. You have your subscriber line charge, you have taxes and other supported fees, 911. It gets up closer to 40 or more, depending on what the case might be. Again, just to be able to call in a very small region. One last thing on, Senator Landon talked about the costs going up over time. Costs have gone up for us as well, but we still have a cap that's in there for the cost-based Universal Service Fund that was put in 2015 based on data from 2014 with the understanding of what our cost would be for our network. We haven't changed that. It's still the same cap. So what we're expecting from customers, what we're expecting from the Universal Service fee is flat for 9 years, and we're not looking to seek to increase that. So with that, I would stand for any more questions you might have.
Anybody? Mr. Hendricks, is it your testimony that no one has long-distance service with their local?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure if I quite got that, but if you do have local service to pay for long distance, you would have to pay additional fees for that, whether it's a flat fee per month or if you're paying on a per minute basis, whatever it be. So in my example of Burns, if you wanted to call Du Bois, Wyoming, in that scenario, you would have to pay a long distance fee for that, either per minute or, like I said, per monthly, whatever it is. So that's in addition to the local, and that's what local still provides access to long distance, but the $30 fee does not cover the long distance.
Would you be able to provide us with some bills for various companies illustrating that point that you're trying to make here?
Mr. Chairman, I'd be glad to do so.
Thank you very much. All right, who's next? This guy doesn't look like an old person. Looks pretty young, don't you think? Don't know how he can speak for us old people. To you.
Chairman Case, I trimmed my beard down this morning, but it was very gray. And by the way, I turned 50 this year, which makes me eligible officially to be an AARP member. Thank you, Sam Shumway with AARP, standing in support of the bill. We were privileged and honored to work with the working group on the development of this bill, a very productive process. There's one small area that I want to address very briefly. Broadband specifically is addressed in this bill for a very limited purpose. It's defined, and then it's addressed to limit the authority of political subdivisions to enter into exclusive broadband contracts. We're fine with that. The one point I want to make is as broadband becomes more and more ubiquitous, and we know that many of the telecommunication services are carried over broadband voice over IP services, to the extent that we can ensure reliability, cost, the quality of the service that folks are getting, I think is a really important conversation that we need to have. What that conversation looks like, it's not a conversation for now, but I think it's a conversation potentially in the interim, ensuring that customers have some recourse. Right now, if they have issues with their over-the-top broadband telephone service, they can complain to the FCC, or they can do a process with the Public Service Commission informally where they will, out of the goodness of their hearts, take that complaint, pass it along to the company, and they'll address that informally. That's a good process. I think it's working. But we think there may be a time when we need to formalize that process to ensure that customers have some recourse if they're not getting the service that they were promised, as broadband becomes more and more essential to the everyday lives and more ubiquitous in our lives, and in particular the lives of our members. So that's the only point I want to make. Again, standing in support, we think it's a good bill, but I wanted to put that out there. Standing for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Shumway. Any questions for Mr. Shumway? Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
I'm getting older. My back is getting old.
Well, you're still a pretty young guy. Okay, anybody else in the audience? Anybody online? Anybody online? Okay. I think we've heard the testimony. Committee, what's your pleasure? Got a motion by Doc Stater. Discussion on the bill?
We discussed changing,
Your microphone's not on, sir. Doc Stater?
could we discuss on page 11, working with shall rather than may, to give the TSC some solid ground to stand on?
You're being very quiet this morning, but I don't know, your mic's just not that good.
Like to on page.
Is it working, you guys? I don't think it's even working. I know it's green, but you gotta just use your sports microphone. The radio voice.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. To Dodger Stadium.
Page 14. Line 18, stick with shall rather than may, to give the PSC some solid ground to stand on.
Did everybody get that? Page 14, line 18, restore the shall. Any discussion? I think the chronology of this was exactly correct. I think we should have caught it in the interim, and I apologize for that. But I think Senator Scott was going down a road where he had the idea that there can be some leeway for other types of services, but they had to do the non-competitive services. And he was trying to go down that road, and we just kind of, we got part of it and didn't get the rest of it. So the truth is, this actually gets at what Mr. Shumway was talking about at the end, too. I think Senator Scott was trying to go down that road and try to empower the commission to look more at different areas. But for now, I think this is a good cleanup to fix what we didn't do. So any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's carried. Back on the bill. Is there any tolerance for bringing in an amendment to raise it from $30 to $40? Senator Boner.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to see what our industry partners think. I get the impression this bill has been worked hard over the past two
Sure.
terms. I'd hate to do anything to trip it up.
I think that's fair, and I think it's also fair that we actually see it in writing. So I might be bringing a committee of the whole amendment in that area. I look for partners on that, and I put it out to the world. But I think, we have new staff, and it's just kind of on the fly here. So it's okay if we don't take that up now.
Mr. Chairman, I have appreciated the conversation this morning on the universal fund. It's hard for just lay legislators to get up to speed on that, and maybe in the interim, we could visit further about, what's going on there, depending upon how this bill carries through. I'd be supportive of a look at an increase just because of the testimony that we received. But yeah, I look forward to seeing what you have in mind.
Fair enough. And just to put notice out there too, I've always hated the double lines that are subsidized. I don't think that's the right thing to do. I fought that at the administrative level and I failed. So I might bring an amendment along those areas, both of which are going to require bringing a different section into the bill. But they're all sections within the Telecom Act. So I hope we're on safe ground there. So anything else on the Senator Landon?
Mr. Chairman, just a reminder that you did bring up the $500,000 appropriation, and I'm just not sure if now's the time to do that.
I think it's better now than later, and then we can have it re-referred to appropriations right off the top. And it strikes me, Senator Landon, it's not unreasonable. We're not into nickel and diming our agency, especially the agency that makes us money in Wyoming. And if they think they need it, my experience has always been that they don't pad it. So why don't we go ahead and do an appropriation if somebody's willing?
I would make that motion, Mr. Chairman, just making it an even $500,000 one time per IT programming charge to implement necessary software and line items to collect this tax.
You
on
bet.
Prepaid wireless.
And it's also going to collect the 911. That's a selling point we can use because, and that's got bigger future. Any further discussion on that?
Just that it's a transparent way to go about things.
You bet.
Mr.
I think so
Chairman.
too. Anything? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's carried. Back on the bill. Anything else on the bill? Ready for the roll call? Ms. Sharp?
This is a roll call vote on Senate File 51, Wyoming Telecommunications Act revisions. Senator Boner.
Aye.
Senator Dockstader.
Aye.
Senator Landon.
Aye.
Senator Steinmetz.
Excused.
Chairman Case.
Aye.
4 ayes and 1 excused.
Thank you. Senator Steinmetz will be carrying this on the floor. That's just a joke. It's just a joke. It's not meant to be pejorative in any way. I just couldn't resist it. Committee, I'll carry this on the floor, and I'll separate out my standing committee amendments so that I don't, you'll have to, I'll do those separately when I'm done with the direction. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 57, 911 service reporting. Who's going to lead us with this one? Is it going to be you, Mr. Smolinski, or? It's a short bill, and you can be joined by the PSC, and don't all leave the room. Mr. Smolinski, do you want to start us off, and then we'll go to the PSC? And there's some interim committee people, but Senator Dockstadter's maybe not familiar with you, at least not through our committee.
Mr. Chairman,
Appreciate the opportunity. I'll give you a little bit of a background. My name is Nate Smolinski. I am the statewide 911 coordinator. I'm also the statewide interoperable communications coordinator. And the final title I have is the WIDOT Chief Technology Officer. I'll preference this again. This is not a WIDOT deal. So just want to make sure we're kind of keeping that over here right now. And just as a reminder, we started this conversation back up during the Lander and Evanston meetings. And really what this was moving around how our PSAPs are able to communicate and effectively do their job. So public safety answering point, that's your 911 dispatch center. When there is an outage that's happening on the 911 system, how they're actually able to communicate this out to our citizens and what those impacts are. Our PSAPs do have tools, so if the 911 system does go down, they have tools that they can get out to the citizens to make sure that those citizens can still request and obtain emergency services.
When you say tolls,
I'm sorry, tools, Mr. Chairman, tools.
tools,
Yes.
he's from back east.
Mr. Chairman, I am, thank you for pointing that out. Makes my job that much easier today. So, Mr. Chairman, what we really took a look at is there are FCC requirements in place that have trigger points of when the carriers actually have to notify an outage. There are some new requirements that are out there. They have improved, they've helped. However, when we take a look at some of the conversation we had earlier in rural Wyoming, that's an issue. One of those requirements, the trigger point, is 900,000 user minutes have got to be down before that trigger comes into play. So if you kind of do the math work there in some of our small communities, that could be days. So really what we're taking a look at here is Senate File 0057. It kind of provides us the framework to work together and actually develop some rules that'll work with Wyoming in order to meet our needs. We've had some preliminary meetings. The partners that have been through with the carriers, the PSC, we have WASCOP, WCCA, and Homeland Security have all kind of worked together to kind of see how this can really unfold, what makes the most sense. I will say we've come into meetings, when I say we, some of the PSAPs are kind of saying, hey, we want to have this, this, and this. We're really trying to work together as a partnership to make sure that the expectations we're setting are going to be realistic and deliverable by the carriers. We understand where we are right now. We're not in the next generation 911 world. Our technology is limited. So what we're asking for, that data, we want to make sure it can be delivered. And we want to make sure it's not going to be a massive lift on the actual providers of the carriers. As we migrate into a next gen 911, we'll probably have this conversation again because we're going to have different tools to be able to kind of move through this a little bit better. So, Mr. Chairman, the second part of the bill, what we're actually talking about here, it's kind of easy. This one actually just adds the Public Safety Communications Commission, the PSCC, as a recipient and changes the dates of when our PSAPs are going to report their 911 fee collection and their 911 fee expenditures. We're moving them from a fiscal year to a calendar year. This better aligns with some of the requirements we have as a state to deliver this information to the FCC. The reason why we do that, it keeps us eligible for any grant opportunities that might come down the road from the feds. Mr. Chairman, from that standpoint, I think I'll stand for any questions from my side before handing it over to the PSC here.
Thank you, Mr. Smolinski. I really do appreciate it. And if you indulge me, committee, we might, this is just kind of the first bit of looking at 911's future in Wyoming. So there are some very large issues out there. One is significantly required investment to provide state-of-the-art 911 service for all our citizens in Wyoming. Yeah, next gen, or it used to be enhanced, but now it's next gen, which provides a lot of capabilities for public safety, but will be very, very expensive and requires a lot of fees, which fees are collected in this area from telecommunications service. I personally say, that's not, just because you have a phone, why are you paying these public safety kind of fees? It's really a broader issue than that. But that's not part of this bill, but that's in our future. There's also this issue of the delivery side of 911 and public safety services. Wyoming is a bit territorial. We have, of course, 23 counties. We actually have, for public safety answering centers, we have more centers than we have counties. It's kind of a territorial thing, especially with some organizations in law enforcement. I'm not going to call anybody out, but every county seems to think they need to have at least one, even the smallest to the largest. And then some have multiple. Fremont County is an offender. Law enforcement is dispatched through our sheriff's department, who has the main dispatch center in Lander, but the city of Riverton has their own dispatch center. They handle their own emergency calls. They have their own staffing for that center. Other counties have similar situations. It's interesting to me that in parts of the country, there are 911 centers that serve a populace greater than our entire state, just a single center. And if you read about the difficulty of staffing these centers and having personnel that are trained, it's not an easy job, it's a terrible job, and on and on and on. So these challenges remain ahead of us. There have been some bright spots in Sweetwater County. There's been significant efficiencies put in with consolidation. They don't like the term consolidation, maybe there's a better term, but for sharing the functionality. And so I want to set those two stages. I think Mr. Smolinski had hopes for a much more comprehensive kind of dive in this area, and this is where we've come, but we've actually come a long way. And I would turn it back to you, Mr. Smolinski, if you had any comments on what I just said.
Now, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for highlighting some of the efforts and some of the challenges we have across the state. You are correct. We were looking to take a little bit of a bigger bite of this, but I think we're going to kind of back off a little bit and look to work with this committee should they entertain it into the interim about some of the funding and some of the other challenges. One of the terms you use there, which consolidation. That is not necessarily a term when we're talking about the PSAP world. You're not going to be favored upon. So what we've done is we've taken a look and actually talk about regionalization. So
better term.
The consolidation, I kind of refer to it as a brick and mortar, right? Where we're taking things, we're putting together. Regionalization is done more with technology. So during a November meeting with our PSAP partners at an APCO conference in Casper, we actually had a few vendors come and discuss what regionalization looks like. Very high level. A call handling system that a PSAP would use could cost maybe, let's just say, $250,000. What we're finding out is that same one box, that call system, could actually be operated by 5, 6, et cetera, PSAPs. So now we're taking this, and instead of one PSAP or 5 PSAPs spending $250,000 each one of them could do $50,000. With that, they're not losing control. They're maintaining their data. So it kind of is that middle ground that we're trying to find here as we take a look at some of these technologies. But I appreciate the opportunity to expand upon that a little bit, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any preliminary questions, comments? All right. Thank you, Mr. Smolinski. I've enjoyed working with you. Mr. Petrie, I've enjoyed working with you too, sir.
Mr. Chairman, it's a pleasure. Mr. Chairman, I just have a couple things to add here. One thing about our current situation is that the Public Service Commission has limited or no jurisdiction or authority over many of the entities and operations that might be touching the 911 system, that might have an outage, that might cause a problem. So what this statute does is it has, and the other part of that is that we're looking at a solution for here is that, as Mr. Smolinski said, 900,000 minutes takes a while in many parts of Wyoming, where our local emergency services folks and others might really care, might really want to know what's going on, might have other options for informing the citizenry that there's a problem with 911. Or you could have a 911 outage in the midst of some other problem, fires, you use your imagination, fires, floods, and so forth. So what this statute does, it uses a couple of existing defined terms, service supplier, and 911 emergency reporting system have pretty broad definitions. Those basically bring in everybody that has a part in providing the 911 service and the function of it. And so the idea here is that the Public Service Commission would conduct a rulemaking to set some parameters that are more appropriate for Wyoming than the 900,000 user limits threshold for reporting. And as Mr. Smolinski also mentioned, we've been talking to people in industry, and we're committed to arranging a reporting system so that it would be minimally burdensome on the reporter, so that they wouldn't be, for example, having to notify Wyoming Office of Homeland Security, us, and anybody at WYDOT or the local emergency services people. We'll make it as best we can a one report system so that the information will disseminate once it's reported. The idea there is to make it effective and efficient and to minimize the burden on the reporters. Of course, we're going to have to consider establishing some other thresholds or reporting criteria. We can do that in a rulemaking process, and I think that we'll have a good opportunity to do that with the people that are actually the 911 service suppliers.
Perfect, Mr. Petrie. Thank you. Questions for either of these gentlemen? Thank you. We're going to try to get this one done today, so we only have a few minutes. You guys are great. Thank you very much. Anybody feel a need to address this bill? Anybody opposed to this bill? Anybody online wish to address this bill? Oh, we need a, thank you very much. We'll correct that too. Let's take this bill first. Committee, you've heard the testimony. What is your pleasure?
Move the bill.
A motion by Landon. Last bill was moved by Doc Stater, by the way, the very quiet senator from, they were sending me a deal. They didn't know if it was moved, but it was moved by Doc Stater. Okay, we've got a motion by Landon. Discussion. Any proposed amendments? Proposed amendments? All right, let's call the roll.
This is roll call on Senate File 57, 9/11 service reporting. Senator Boner.
Aye.
Senator Dockstader.
Aye.
Senator Landon.
Aye.
Senator Steinmetz.
Excused?
Senator Case.
Aye.
4 ayes and 1 excused.
Who would like to carry this bill? Could I have a volunteer?
All right.
All right, got Landon. I love it. It's a team. Mr. Smolinski, were you at all aware of the situation with 911 interruption on the Wind River Indian Reservation?
Mr. Chairman, yes, the PSC. However,
Yeah, sit down and hit your mic real quick. Everybody can leave if they want to.
Mr. Chairman, probably the information we heard today was the most that I've heard so far.
Yeah.
And I think part of that was the collaboration that was happening, as far as from Lumen, as well as, I think this is kind of the thing that we're peeling back details as we find them.
Well, let me know as you keep looking into it, okay?
We